CDM and the Georgia Records own master of the universe, Tom Teague. How you doing, my friend?
Good. Sounds like $49.99 is a really good deal on gold, doesn't it?
It does.
It sounds like a Walmart rollback in some ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So Tom, give us your take on you and I have had a lot of discussions on Trump's. You got to see the big picture here of what he's attempting to do in the financial markets and really against the financial matrix, if you will. So what do you see happening?
Well, I think, the big picture is that we're in this sort of like rebalancing of empires. Europe kind of being a loser. They're going to lose the Donbass, which is like $13 trillion of mineral wealth, clearly. And, Greenland is going to be in some way controlled by the U.S. We don't know how that pertains to mineral rights and that stuff. Trump's going into Venezuela and sort of reasserting ourselves in Latin America and South America and pushing away the Chinese who've done all their bridge and road stuff to try and build goodwill and try to control, these natural resources. So I think that's like the overview. I think, clearly, if you look at one thing to think about is like the percentage of, or actually oil per GDP and how much these countries are using, like with what's going on in the world and us in Venezuela. Venezuela is not a big part of what China's bringing in. But if you look at Iran and you look at Russia, that's 50%, Saudi Arabia is 50%, and China uses about 50% more oil per GDP than we do. So there is a commodity grab going on right now. I was just like sort of looking at silver over the last few years, and the amount that's produced, 80% of it comes from mines. It's moved up to about 60% goes for industry now between EVs, solar, and AI stuff. So that's had a pretty big, meaningful impact on it. But, it's funny because the amount produced and the total demand has been in deficit for about 4 years. And we've just really seen this price increase in silver, like this massive price increase of like 186% since last year. So, you have to ask yourself what's going on. And if you look at where silver spot is trading for physical, it's trading at like a $15 premium. It usually trades between 2 and 10. So there's something going on there. I mean, my first thought on that is I think that, and I've been a gold bug for a lot of years. And I've always felt like gold has underperformed where it should be based on, monetary policy, based on the reckless spending, MMT, all that stuff. But I've always been like, baffled by why it hasn't gone up. And I think the US banks, like, I'm not going to name names, but I think there's some pretty big players. And I think through the paper markets, like the futures markets and such, they borrow gold from central banks and they sell forward. And that creates kind of a top on it. But in the last like 3 or 4 years, you've had these other markets that we don't control opening up, right? You got, market in Saudi Arabia, you've got a market in China now. So it's kind of, I think, taken the control that we've had over some of these precious metals away from us. Now, regards to silver, and in doing so, it's kind of let these things trade at the value, in particular gold. I think it's kind of let it trade at the value that is more of a free market value and less of a manipulated value. I think that, one thing to note, like in terms of silver production, it's like, Mexico is the largest producer. Then you have China, then you have Peru, which is about the same, Bolivia. So a lot of the silver is produced in our hemisphere, right? So again, I think this is just kind of a tug of war. I think that if you look at the demand for it, it's not like 25 had a deficit that was greater than 24 in terms of demand versus supply in silver. It's just that people are waking up now, I think. A lot of people try to say that it's, we're in this super cycle of commodities and base metals. And I think if you look at, what the base metal over copper, everything all together in aggregate, there's going to be also a meaningful impact on our PCE from these base metals going up, which is about 1 basis point in PCE to a 1% move on these base metals over a sustained period of time. Now, there's a lot of people, there's not an exact science to that, but that's what sort of people think that how that figures in. So you could potentially see, inflationary pressures of 40 basis points come into PCE, which is not a great thing. So that's something to, keep in mind.
For our audience, Tom, what's PCE?
It's the measurement that the Fed uses outside of it's the preferred measurement, like CPI is consumer price index. PCE is the preferred measurement, which calculates a lot of the input costs that go in things. It's not the same basket, but it's the preferred one that the Fed likes.
That's how they measure inflation, is what you're saying.
Yes, correct. It's a measurement of inflation.
Yeah.
So, I guess the big question right now is, what does silver do going forward? Is this rally sustained? I think if you look at silver to gold, that's a big ratio that people look at. That's generally at, I think, 50 to 60 times in the last century, because gold has been such a preferred metal, and it's performed really well during crisis, and there's a lot less of an industrial component to it. So when things slow down, gold massively outperforms. But before I think the 20th century, the ratio was between 16 to 20 times. So you could make an argument that silver's got a long ways to go. And if 80% of silver is coming from mines, it's not like everybody can rush out with their coins right now and sell their coins and do something about this. I personally don't think that the sort of supply demand imbalance is growing in a worrying way. So I would say that, I think more than anything, people are just waking up to, these metals, and there's just a general repricing of these metals, that are breaking historical trends. But I think with silver, it's had such a crazy outperformance. I would not be surprised if we get some sort of correction. You say that and then it goes up another 20%, but it's just, I don't see that the supply demand is that broken right now that something would change that would, completely account for this. I think it's just, like I said, making up sort of its past cheapness right now.
So you have Tom Longo, I sent you a clip, and others coming out and saying the Trump administration may actually be using this price increase and reversion to mean, if you will, to try and hurt the silver markets in London, or at least some of the nefarious financial players. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that we've probably net benefited from the banks sitting on these precious metals, because it's kept them, lower, and it's kept our dollar stronger over time. I don't know that it's an intention. I don't have any real sense that it's an intentional thing to get London. I know that's a big theme about the city of London right now, and the sort of empire. And like I mentioned earlier, I think clearly that the European empire is waning right now. But I think that it probably has more to do with just the sort of the attempt for a lot of these countries to move away from the dollar and create their own markets that they can control for these precious metals, which they've done. And that's obviously what's sort of made it go crazy, right?
A warm welcome here at the National Press Club. Welcome to the journalists, welcome to the Embraer team, and welcome to the other guests that we have here. Going to announce, and as some of you guessed it right when they came in, the first E2 order by an American operator. And that operator is Avello. We believe this is really a strategic shift to unlock profitability for the customer. I'm very pleased that we have Andrew Levy here as the CEO of Avello, and I'm very pleased to give the stage to share a little bit more about what Avello is going to do with the E2 195. Thank you very much.
Couldn't be more excited to be here as part of this historic announcement. We have such a great cultural fit as companies, so we're very, very excited to be Embraer's newest customer. We launched our airline in April of 21, And our target is focusing on small secondary airports of large metro areas. We've carried over 8 million customers since we started on 63,000 flights. And we've done all these things with 1,200 of the greatest crew members I could ever imagine having, and many of them are here with me today. This is the right airplane for us. It's going to open up opportunities for us that no other aircraft can serve. The best thing about the airplane, of course, is you will not find a middle seat on this airplane. It doesn't exist. We won't have any to offer. It's going to be the best cabin in the United States, and we're so excited about that. This is going to elevate our experience to the highest level, and we think our customers are absolutely going to love the airplane.
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Bill, you got any questions?
Yeah, I do. So I've got, let me take this in two respects. One is, you look back in history, and there's been, from the beginning of the Constitution, gold and silver were defined within the Constitution as the notion of stable money, stable monetary funds, as it were. And in fact, the Constitution prevents the states from creating any other forms of instruments to be able to use for payment. It doesn't, however, prevent the federal government from doing that. And so that's where we end up with fiat currency back in the beginning of the Fed and so forth. It's notable to many, and there's been a number of writings over the last few months about, you go back in history, and there's been times when the government or others have taken away our access to precious metals.
Yep.
1933. They confiscated everything, including what was in people's safe deposit boxes, left them an IOU.
Yep.
In the 70s,
they gave them a rate where they bought it, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so it seems that there are times when gold, perhaps silver as well, are valued or prized by those in control. I'll call it. We'll play a little conspiracy theory here. By those in control. And there are some saying, maybe this is a way to put control back in the hands of the people. Because if everybody in the world suddenly went out and bought even a couple ounces of silver, the market would be unpredictable, probably. So there's that. Yeah. There's also evidence over the last few years that some have been manipulating certain metals prices. I think not all our audience, but many may be aware that JP Morgan had a couple folks actually sentenced to prison for manipulating the metals market, specifically silver. I think it went perhaps beyond that. And they weren't the only one. There were several banks that got caught up in this, but JP Morgan is probably the most notable. When you think about that, when you think about there's players out there that have been playing games with the cost and the value of metals, do you see that playing into what we're seeing now in some way? Maybe as opposed to the bad guys playing games, maybe the good guys are playing games with the bad guys. What do you think?
I definitely think that there's been manipulation in the metals, as I said before. I think they've been doing it more to sort of protect the dollar in the past, and they've sort of kept a lid on it. I think the widespread sort of belief is that if you took all the futures contracts and everyone took physical delivery, you'd have gold price at like ridiculous levels because there's just not enough to go around. And I think, there's all kinds of conspiracy theories about, what's left in Fort Knox, what's being held, but I would say in the last year in gold in particular, you've had, quite a few central banks buying gold as well. And I think this is, in my view, this is more about other countries trying to break away from the dollar as the sort of reserve currency. It's part of that process. And, with regards to people owning precious metals and the value of precious metals, I think like I said, I've been a gold bug for a long, long time, since like 2000. And, my view has always been, at some point we're going to get to a phase with our governments where their spending is so out of control that the fiat system will invariably collapse. And if you look at, Europe, for example, they've been spending like crazy. They're not obviously spending on defense. They have like huge entitlements. We're doing the same here. There's massive amounts of fraud in our government. None of this looks good from a fiscal perspective of the government. I am a bit surprised that this stuff is doing that well right now, because I think this is the first time we've had a chance of actually turning the ship around with this administration. And possibly, I'll be very surprised if the U.S. can grow at like between 4 and 5% GDP this year, if these metals are still at this level going into next year. Because I think that'll be, that'll show that it's working in the U.S. And I think you'll get a lot of foreigners buying U.S. dollars potentially to participate in this growth. Whether it's, for people investing in stocks and bonds and our credit worthiness getting better as we grow our way out of it. But I'm not convinced that what we've seen in these metals is necessarily like good for our government, because like I said, it can feed into inflation. So I don't necessarily know why we would want to make silver like go like crazy high, unless, we've got some view that it's really going to harm China. But, China's like the second largest producer of it. So again, when things don't make sense to me, I usually kind of think that it's something else, but maybe I just don't understand it. But I do think that these precious metals have started reflecting value that they haven't reflected in years past. So there's a catch-up game right now.
Let me ask you this, Tom. Revaluation of gold on the books, is that something you see happening? Two-part question. And two, would that lead up to some kind of going back on some type of commodity standard for the currency?
Well, that definitely would improve our balance sheet like massively. And I don't know what the quantum of that is offhand, because last time I looked, gold was in a much different place, and I don't have those numbers in front of me, but it would definitely help our balance sheet. So I think that would work in our favor. I don't know how much silver we actually hold as a government. We hold a lot of things, but I don't know that offhand. But I think, clearly that helps. It's a question of like, do we go and then sell gold? And that's always a possibility, right? We could sell some of our reserves if we revalue them and pay down some of our debt. That's a possibility. But I think the quantum between the amount of debt we have and the amount of gold we have, even at today's prices, is pretty extreme. Okay.
Bill, you got anything else?
That's it. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. I have a funny feeling.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think we've seen the end of this by a mile.
Yeah. Well, people are telling me they think we're going to be at $10,000 gold. There's no way it's going to stop. So, we'll see.
So, Tom, you are in the works of developing a show for CDM on financial. It's going to be the first show on CDM business. So, I'm looking forward to that. So stay tuned.
I gotta get the name right.
Yeah, I won't ask you again this time. So when you're ready, you let me know. Thank you very much, Tom.
All right, guys. Great to
take care. Ciao.
Thank you.